All right. Welcome all to the 90 Washington Street Civic Advisory Committee to discuss updates on the redevelopment of 90 Washington Street in East Somerville. Before we start with tonight's meeting, I would like to take a quick roll call of members, starting. Councillor Wilson, would you mind starting us off?
Present.
Excellent. Bill Mahaney.
Present.
Thank you. Rory.
Yeah, I'm here.
Excellent. Alex.
Yep, present.
Excellent. Paolo.
Under the Boston Harbor, but I'm present.
Well done. And Zachary.
Here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Also want to acknowledge our past member, Melaine Malcolm, is in attendance, as well as Kim Wells from the clerk's office.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our newest staff member in the Economic Development's Real Estate Division, Katie Weiss. Katie,
Hi,
do you
everyone.
want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Katie Weiss, and I just joined the Economic Development team a month or two ago. Great to be here.
Excellent. You'll be seeing more of Katie in the future. Thank you very much. And with the introductions underway, tonight we're going to discuss updated goals and priorities for 90 Washington Street redevelopment. Ben Demers from our real estate practice and economic development will lead you through a presentation of those goals. We sent a memo about them earlier in the week. So without further ado, I'm going to transfer you to Ben. And Ben, if you want to share your screen, I believe you're able to.
Yeah, I should be able to. Give me 1 second. So it is asking for a request, so let me send a request.
You're allowed.
Perfect. Thank you, Ted. Okay. Are folks able to see a screen that says 90 Washington Street development goals? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Good to see everyone this evening. Let me just click a few other buttons quick so I can see more faces while I am presenting. I don't love when it creates the little row that always goes awkwardly to the side of the screen. Okay, hi everyone. As Ted mentioned, my name is Ben Demers. We have, I believe, met in the past couple of Civic Advisory Committee meetings. I, as Ted mentioned, am also a senior planner in our real estate team within the Economic Development Division. So really, I work closely with Ted and Rachel and have been supporting this project primarily for the last year. That's why you've been starting to see my face a little bit more often. The goal of what we're going to talk about this evening is discussing and gathering feedback on slightly updated development goals for the development of 90 Washington Street. These were shared in a memo prior to the meeting, as Ted mentioned, so I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. In terms of an agenda, I'm just going to start by reminding everyone kind of where we are in the overall process. I know it's been kind of larger swaths of time between meetings, and also the process has been changing a little bit since last October, so kind of want to give a sense of where we are in the overall process. I'm also going to just kind of reiterate some of the financial considerations that we've talked about in the past few meetings, just so those are kind of fresh in everyone's mind. And then we'll kind of spend most of the time talking about the updated development goals and getting any feedback on some of these updates that that staff are recommending. I want to make sure that there's nothing that we are misrepresenting as we're trying to take those financial considerations that we've talked about into account. And then I'll talk about some next steps. I'm going to talk for a quick moment on zoning. I'm probably not going to spend too much time on this, but want to just give a quick update since I know I did mention it in the memo ahead of time. Are there any questions up top before we get started? No, cool. I will say also, please feel welcome to raise your hand as we go. I will have kind of set times for questions throughout, but if you want to stop me and also ask a question or something really stands out, please feel welcome to.
Ben, I just want to quickly acknowledge that Bill Valletta has joined the meeting. Thank you, Bill.
Welcome. Okay. So I want to start off by talking about the overall process, which I'm sure you've talked about with Ted in the past. I know you've talked about with Ted in the past. Just to give a sense of where we are. So this is the process that is really laid out in the 90 Washington Street demonstration project plan. And so this is the plan that really governs the redevelopment of the site. There's also an agreement between the city council and the redevelopment authority about what this process should look like. So that's really where we are pulling these steps from. The first few steps are ones that this team has been working on. So I would kind of put these under the category of RFP preparation. The first of these is conducting engagement, which all of you have been a part of. And then from that engagement, the goal is to shape development goals for the site. And so that's really where we are now. Obviously, you've done a lot of work with Ted to craft the vision of those goals, first for the RFQ and then also for the draft RFP that y'all were putting together. And then engagement has really been based around asking, what is the goal for the private redevelopment that will be included on the site? Once those goals are finalized, staff are then meant to take those goals to the city council, and the council will need to approve prior to them being included in an RFP. And then the redevelopment authority kind of releases that RFP, which staff are guiding that process. So those are the first few steps, and we're really kind of in that first step, moving into the second. The next handful of steps are focused on developer selection. So the CAC, once we have responses to the RFP, the CAC will select 2 finalists and send those to the city council. The council then can either basically accept those 2 suggestions. They can also make a vote to sub out one of the suggestions. So that will be how things are really narrowed down from the pool of applicants. And then from there, those 2 finalists are sent to the redevelopment authority. The redevelopment authority will choose a final selected development partner. The next category is kind of in this negotiation of an agreement. So the SRA would then negotiate a land agreement or land development agreement, and that ultimately will need to be approved by the city council. So it's kind of another touch point where things are going back to the council for their oversight. And the last that I'll mention is just, once the project is actually selected, I do want to note that there is still kind of the whole zoning review process that needs to happen. So once a project is actually ready to move forward, they'll have to go in front of the planning board, get those approvals. It goes a little more into the details at that point. So mostly I'm reiterating this process up top to mention, obviously at this point of the process, we want to get it right to summarize what people want to see from development on this site. I also then want to note that there are kind of additional points of review in the future, and just want to make sure that people know where those points are. So both for the Civic Advisory Committee in terms of reviewing the proposals that come in, but then also the City Council in terms of approving those finalists and then also approving final development deals. So that's kind of one piece of context. The other thing I did want to mention before I get into talking about the specific goals is just kind of reiterating some of the financial impact that we've talked about in the last few meetings. So I know we've given these numbers a little bit. Just a reminder, when the redevelopment authority in the city originally took this property, they paid about 8.8 million for the property at the time based on an appraisal. As commonly happens, there was a lawsuit that's obviously kind of influenced and been background to a lot of the work that's been happening here. The outcome of that was owing significantly more money. So between the jury found that the site was worth a little over 35 million, and then with interest, that brought the total payment to about 39 million. So that's a difference of about a little over 30 million from what was originally paid in the original taking. That's a big difference. Just to give a sense of comparison, because I know like when numbers get that large, it also feels a little abstract. To give a sense, the city's budget last year was about 360 million. So 30 million as a swing, that's about 8%. It's a pretty significant portion of the city's budget. To also give a sense, the portion of our budget that we currently use for debt service, so kind of paying our debt on larger projects that we're not able to pay all at once, that's a little under 6%. So, this $30 million swing is more than our debt service for a year. So that's kind of why we are coming to these meetings with sort of this additional financial concern, and to kind of put that into context. And that obviously, yeah, please, Bill.
Before we go to the new guidelines and all of that, can I ask a question about why are we still in redevelopment authority? Is the redevelopment authority is still in control And, we're not demonstrating anything more, anymore. The demonstration projects, substantiation for the authority of the redevelopment authority seems to be gone at this point. So the first question is a legal question. Is the redevelopment authority still in control? And if so, why? And why don't we just, get rid of it is the wrong word, but, isn't it a simpler process since the city now owns this piece of land, why are we not just disposing of it in the normal, process of property disposition that we don't need anymore? That's the series of questions.
Sure. Yeah, let me take my best swing at summarizing the answer to that. I will say our legal counsel that works on this is not on with us tonight. I can ask her to kind of give a better answer to the short version that I will give now. So yes, the redevelopment authority is still in control. They still own the land. The goal of the demonstration project plan, it was obviously to create a public safety building, but there are several explicit goals in that plan to eliminate blight is the terminology under urban renewal. So really kind of taking what was an underutilized commercial parcel and creating something usable there, creating something vibrant there. So that is still an explicit goal separate from the public safety building. But you're right that it's a little awkward of a process. And so our goal is to really kind of update the demonstration project plan as we're bringing these development goals to the council to just kind of make that more of the focus of the conversation. So really focus on the blight eliminating elements of this redevelopment. You're muted. I couldn't tell if you had a follow-up question, Bill. No, okay. Hello.
Hi, thanks, Ben. Just because you're mentioning it and it's being brought up sort of in the wider context, I would like to know and consider if we should be including some language in what we're sort of presenting to the council to consider where the status of the public safety building and its future lives, since that was the impetus for the initial take on this parcel and the city's intention, and to be personal about it. It was one of my motivations for why I wanted to join this committee. So I understand and will stay committed to following through on what ends up happening with 90 Washington, but I don't want the city to take their eye off the ball for what is needed in terms of a new public safety building, which was what started this whole process in the first.
Yeah, no, thank you for that comment. I guess I'll say in terms of our planning processes, we've kind of separated them into two separate tracks. So this team has primarily been working on the conversation of how do we dispose of the site and redevelop the site separate from the public safety conversation. There are future conversations to be had about what is the future of the public safety building, about kind of the conditions of the current public safety building that really spurred that conversation. And I know there have been already some short-term conversations between the capital projects team, the mayor's office, and the police and fire departments about kind of shorter-term interventions. So it's definitely something that is high priority, is making sure that everyone has good conditions to work in. That was, as you mentioned, a big part of the impetus for this project in the first place. So there's some shorter term elements that they're working on. In terms of kind of long term, where is that site going to go? That conversation is still at an earlier point of the process, and it's been kind of separated off here, just given kind of the pressing financial concern related to the judgment.
Rory, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm just curious, so we've been years at this, and that process that you just laid out seems like it's going to take years more. I mean, why are we not skipping 3 or 4 steps and just going to the 3 teams that we had selected before and just asking them for, have one meeting saying what we need in this new building, ask them, give them 2 weeks to come up with a proposal, and then go to the council with what those 3 teams say?
Sure. So there was discussion at the time, like kind of when the judgment was first released, about sort of how the process should pivot. And we had these conversations already with 3 respondents to the RFQ. It was ultimately determined that it was a big enough change in terms of what we were looking for on the site that it warranted kind of it warranted its own RFP process. And I know, this looks like one out of what is 7 steps that I laid out. The goal is that the first few steps on that list, and I can just go back quickly, hold on. Are y'all still seeing my screen, or is it? Yes, it is. Okay. So the goal is that the first few steps on this list, so the discussion with the council and the hopeful approval of those development goals and then releasing an RFP, that is happening in the next couple of months, in early next year. So that we're hoping to move on fairly quickly.
Okay.
Right. Any other questions before Ben proceeds? I don't see any hands. Ben,
And
why
I guess
don't you? Oh,
I
sorry.
just want to see if there's any follow-up, I guess, to either of the answers that I gave. And I also just saw Rachel Ned-Carney, who's our Director of Economic Development, came on camera, so I assume she might have a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the point about the 3 teams. Ted, feel free to elaborate too. Did speak with all 3 of those teams. And again, this is a big departure. Our real estate advisor suggested, that's really limiting the market. If we just went to those 3 teams, because what if there's a 4th team that, wasn't interested in engaging on the public safety building, but would otherwise be interested in the site, and they didn't submit for the RFQ, but now they would be, a potentially fantastic and a higher bidder, and, be able to do more of what we're looking for without the public safety building. So that was the reason for opening it up.
All right. I see Councilor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. I just want to go back to the question about the public safety building side of things. Like, obviously, if it's not being built there, that brings us back to square one in terms of the process of looking to do a public safety building. The current one at 220 Washington, it's an old building, it's obsolete, it's a sick building. We need a new one. So it'll be probably a process of doing a new site selection study, and that'll be up to the next mayor to make sure that process moves forward. But we are obligated to sell that land at 220 Washington Street to US 2. And so that, combined with the fact that, we know it's not an appropriate facility for city employees, means we're going to have to look to move ahead with that. So that's where that is.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, Ben, why don't you continue?
Yeah, I did just want to give a second. I know, Alex, I saw your hand raised quickly. If you want to forego the question for now. But...
Yeah, sure. I want to keep this brief, but did the city reach out to the 3 developers we spoke to before? I wouldn't want them to feel, and it's probably different for corporate than like job seekers, but it kind of is a job. Don't want them to feel ghosted, I guess, and less likely to participate in the next round.
I spoke to them directly at the very outset of this re-engineered process.
Awesome.
And they acknowledged the situation, and they were grateful that we contacted them right away.
That's great. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right.
Bill, yes.
Could I ask one more question about, again, going back to the idea that this is still a redevelopment authority project, et cetera. One of the big issues that's in the mayoral campaign is people talking about the need for more housing and social housing and that sort of thing. Has the option of keeping the land and maybe doing social housing or, doing a city project on it been raised as an alternative to moving forward with this demonstration project that no longer has anything to demonstrate?
So just to summarize, the question being, have we considered the option of kind of land banking the land rather than selling it at this point? I think with any disposition, we're always asking ourselves if it makes sense to sell at this point versus holding, and if there's going to be, a better use in the future, if there's going to be a better time to sell in the future. In this case, we think that the financial burden of the judgment and the ability to address it by disposing of the site makes it worth it to still move in this moment. But I mean, it's a great question. It's always something that we're considering whenever we're considering disposing of land.
If I can also just add, the part of the disposition, we'll be continuing to evaluate that, right? We're going to get proposals back. We don't know what how the market's going to respond. This is one of many places where we'll be making a decision. It's not the last decision.
Great. Right, I don't see any other hands. Ben, back to you.
Okay. So I'm going to walk us through the development goals that I shared in the memo. So as the memo explained, these are really aiming to pull from the goals that had been decided previously. So I think the last time that these were updated were April or May of 2024. And that was really kind of coming out of the RFQ process. There were also some conversations being had around parking, et cetera, at the time. So that's really the goals that we were pulling from, and still trying to make sure that we are respecting the intent of those goals, which had been themselves shaped out of the engagement that was going on. And then also making sure that we are kind of adding something explicitly about recouping funds, and trying to also broaden some of the goals a little bit to kind of be more open to different development proposals. So want to make sure that we feel on board still with what we are recommending moving forward with, and just kind of can capture any comments from CAC members as we're continuing that conversation. So I'm going to walk through different goals. So the first that we have added in is obviously recouping a significant portion of funds paid for the taking of 90 Washington Street. Keeping things fairly general in that case. The reason we want to have this explicit up front, with many municipal land dispositions, the focus is not on recouping funds. So we want to make that fairly clear up front. The second section discusses land uses that we want to achieve. This is very similar, if not some of the sections exact, to what was in the previous version of these goals. So the four land uses are still the same: new housing, new commercial space, especially talking about kind of ground floor commercial spaces, so ground floor retail, a particular focus on grocery markets, restaurants, pharmacies that people want to see in the neighborhood. Also talking about the creation of new civic space, and civic space in this case being used to refer to space for kind of civic groups, so nonprofit organizations, et cetera. So a little different. We sometimes use civic space in our zoning terms to talk also just about like open space or green space, but that's kind of a specific call out also. So want to make sure that we are achieving green space, active and passive, on the site. So those have not changed significantly. In the third section on development principles, this really gets into more detail of what we are hoping to see in some of the specifics that set this disposition apart from other projects. So the first here, mixed use building formats. The parcel should primarily be used for housing, but with a variety of ground floor uses. Again, that kind of captures something similar to the discussion of land uses, but I think there's something specific here about it being mixed use building. So really housing over ground floor uses is what we've heard a lot of. Pretty consistent with the previous version. The next of these is dense development. This is a bit of an update from previous language. So the goal here is that we're trying to articulate still the overall aim of introducing a lot of new housing onto the parcel, with either mid-rise or high-rise zoning. And so these are kind of our densest, MR6 or high-rise are our two densest zoning districts within the city. We also want to make it explicit that this density, as much as possible, should be concentrated on the western portion of the site. We know that there's a lot of sensitivity around the proximity of the site to the Cobble Hill apartments directly next door. And so kind of having that density better oriented towards the MBTA station in the western portion of the site and the intersection of Washington and New Washington is something that we heard a lot about during engagement. So I wanted to make sure that that was reflected. We pulled up a bit from what had been kind of an architectural design section, which kind of just had some recommendations that were added in. We simplified that and changed this to flexibility in form or massing. So again, this is really just to articulate, we want to see architectural approaches that deliver high-rise levels of density. So again, a significant amount of density of new housing onto the parcel. But our high-rise zoning has specific building typologies, so specific building shapes, essentially, that you're able to produce. So we want to show we are open to alternative building shapes, and we can get flexible within zoning if that kind of helps better accommodate neighbors and just is a better configuration for the site. We know it's also kind of a uniquely shaped site, both in terms of the angle of Washington and New Washington, but then also sort of the way that the parcel comes around New Washington on the southern portion of Cobble Hill Apartments. So just want to encourage people to take that into account. And then we've kind of simplified the architectural design section. That is something that obviously proposals will come in that will have detail on that. That is also something that's discussed during the site plan approval process. So there's an urban design commission and neighborhood meetings where feedback on those kind of elements are given. So again, kind of sought to simplify that for this set of goals. Okay, the next tier, so for sustainable design, this is still very similar to what was included before. Compliance with Somerville's new stretch energy code. And there was initially a subsection here, or a clause in the sentence around geothermal energy, which again, we removed for simplicity. But we still want to see somebody demonstrating leadership in resilient design. That is a strong expectation within Somerville. So kind of leaving it more open-ended how one can show that within the response process. The fifth is no surface parking. This is still as it was previously. We would not want to see surface parking on a site so close to an MBTA station. That is not the goal. This next one is also a little bit of a departure from what it was previously. Previously, the language that was used to describe this was minimal site disruption. We wanted to focus more on, we know there's a strong importance of trees and of creating green space on the parcel, and especially of creating a buffer. So, appropriate green space that might help create a bit of a buffer zone between new development on the western portion of the site and then any development or the existing apartment buildings at Cobble Hill. So tried to kind of shift the language here to be more about creating new effective civic space or open space. I'll be careful about my use of those here. Creating new effective open and green space. We still want to mention preserving viable trees where possible. There are over 100 trees on the site. We know that that is something important and those take time to grow. So where possible, we really want to encourage the preservation of trees. And then the last, again, this is sort of just a simplification. There previously was a section about diversity, equity, and inclusion within the development process. This shows up in different ways. This has just been kind of condensed down. So nothing has really changed about the idea here, just kind of a different way of presenting it. So those are the different goals that were listed out in the memo. I want to spend some time here seeing if there's any concern or feedback or comments about, or questions about what we have changed in this language to make sure that we do still feel comfortable with how these goals are articulated, so that as we're moving forward with bringing them to the city council, including them in an RFP, that we still feel like it reflects what people want to see on this site. Alex.
Yeah, it would be great to see, I guess, the before and after versions kind of side by side, if that's an option, and to hear about some of the rationale behind why some of this needed to be changed. Is it just for efficiency or to kind of freshen things up? Or, I mean, is there something really substantive that's not apparent here?
Sure. Let me, are there any particular ones you're curious to see side by side? I have a couple of them that we can look at. For the most part, the goal was really to broaden. So it was really to, if there was kind of something that was particularly specific that we thought could still be met, like the intent could still be met, but it might be in a way that allows someone to offer more funds essentially for the site. Those are kind of the competing priorities. Obviously, with any benefits other than like actually a financial offer for the site, the other benefits are generally a cost. So it's generally going to reduce obviously the offer. So, we end up in a position where we want to respect a lot of the intent of those other goals. Those other goals are very real, while also encouraging getting as high of a bid on the parcel as possible.
Yeah, totally understandable. I'm curious of the other members of the CAC and city staff here tonight as well, Jake, whoever. If I don't know, let's say for like sustainable design, is there anything, we're removing geothermal from potential mandates there, but is there any other criteria we might want to think about mandating for any of these categories that have been changed now, or do we want to leave them all pretty vague? I mean, some of these do have them, no service parking, certain aspects of diversity, inclusion, and all that. But I guess are there any specific things, specificities that have been removed that anybody in the CAC would like to see maintained or retained?
But Alex, you kind of stole the words right from my mouth. I'm going to ask each member what their thoughts are and what their comments are.
Coming for your job, Ted.
Thank you. Paolo, can I start with
Ted,
you?
I can't raise my hand, but can I jump in?
Sure.
Oh,
Councilor
sorry.
Wilson, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I don't mean to cut the line. I just have no way of raising my hand right now. Happy to defer to others. Consider this verbal.
Proceed.
Thank you. Sorry, Paolo, if I jumped in front of you there. Yeah, I wanted to point out because we opted into the specialized stretch energy code, anything that comes in here will need to conform to that. That's, the very, very high level, generally, passive house. We're talking, it's going to generally push people towards something like geothermal. And also I'll point out, Councilor Ewan Campen and I introduced and got passed a green roof or vegetated roof ordinance, so that buildings over a certain size are going to be required to have green roofs as well. So there are some requirements in place that are going to keep this, despite what looks like a backsliding in specificity along climate goals, there are plenty of safeguards in place to make sure that whatever comes in here has, good, a very good impact on the climate.
Yeah, and I guess just to reiterate Councilor Wilson's point, I think we saw preservation of including the language on the stretch energy code is kind of the biggest thing to preserve in that language.
Right. Paolo, thoughts or questions?
Thank you, and no problem, Counselor, with jumping the line. I guess my only initial thought is I understand that the desire for transparency in stating the recouping. I just think we're at a tactical disadvantage with this development now, and the fact that the city's just trying to balance its budget sheets, and it's a pretty significant deficit. And so we're now going to need to bring in a project that is worth the upfront costs that are going to be put in just so the developer can recoup their investment in the end and turn a profit on this. So, I mean, I think considering we are now moving from that position rather than where we were when this committee formed, I think it's the best we can do. Obviously, it's not ideal, and I'm not in love with it, but I think it's the best of a bad situation.
All right. Thank you.
I just want to,
Go ahead.
yeah, definitely heard. I guess I want to reiterate, we are planners at heart, and we want to see a good site developed. So I know that we're focusing a lot in the conversation on the financial burden because it is a real burden on the city's ability to offer other services to pursue other really important capital projects. And like that is real, but we also want to see a good site come out. So I do want to reiterate, like these other categories are not completely secondary. Like they're still very much a part of what we are asking for in proposals, and they're very much a part of what you all will be evaluating when we get responses to the RFP. And I know that they're important to city councilors who are going to need to approve of the final selection. So I do want to reiterate that.
No, and I just want to clarify that I don't, my comment was not meant as any sort of criticism of the work that your team is doing here. And I don't know exactly who to point the frustration to that, 8 million has turned into 39. And now we're sort of left with a project that has to ultimately just get us whole again, rather than be able to sort of take what was one of tremendous potential and we could sort of establish all of these very sharp and strong criteria around it. And
Yeah.
I'm glad we're trying to preserve as much as we can, but realize that now the developers will have an advantage in negotiation over us versus
Sure.
where we were 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Understood. All right. Moving on to Bill Mahaney. Bill, do you have any thoughts or questions on these updated goals?
Yeah, two things. Can you hear
Sure.
me?
We can hear you.
This is a yes or no question. Because you've discussed it here tonight. If these three developers, Penrose, Onyx Group, and Greystar, it's going to be our duty to recommend 2 out of those 3, and recommend that to the Somerville Redevelopment Authority. Is that correct?
So, sorry, and I apologize if we didn't give this context in a previous conversation, but just to be clear, so those 3 respondents to the RFQ, that process has essentially been stopped, and so we're starting with a new RFP process that will be open to anyone to apply to. So we've had conversations with each of those developers, but the RFP will be open to more potential developers.
But it will also be open to the developers qualified through the RFQ process if they choose to submit.
Okay, that was one.
Okay.
The other thing is concerning the 10 or 12 of us members, like if there's a new mayor coming in, does the mayor have anything to do with who's on this committee? In other words, will the 10 or 12 of us keep participating in this process?
That is my understanding. Rachel, do you have any insight beyond that?
So membership on the CACs is mayoral appointed. I do not expect that there will be a change, but that ultimately, of course, is up to whoever is in that next seat.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Bill Valletta. Thoughts or questions on these updated goals?
Yeah, I got lots of questions. Let me see. Since the purpose of recouping as much money as possible has been added to this, I think it would be helpful to have some kind of an analysis of how the market has altered over the couple of years that we've been, moving forward on this. Because I think that sort of all these ambitious goals we have about, ground floor uses and, community type of stuff, et cetera, are fantasies. And I look at this site as being a rather routine piece of land that no matter what the city does and how clever we think we are in negotiating, the type of development that's going to get proposed here and built here, in essence, no matter what we do, is going to be what the market delivers at the time that comes forward. If I look around Somerville at these projects that we've spent so much time and effort on, I don't see them yielding anything different in quality and in, specifically creative sort of mix of uses, et cetera, than what is available in any other town and city around the region in Boston. It's what the market produces. So what I would be interested, one important thing that happened just in the last week, Starbucks is closing its place on Davis Square, which says to me that the types of commercial and retail stuff that we've thought has been so enormously important and is lively stuff on street corners, et cetera, is really becoming uneconomic. And the lab building that in Brick Bottom opened across the street from me, they have a cafe, but that cafe doesn't pay any rent. And the day they start paying rent, they're going out of business. The developers already told me that they're giving them free rent as an amenity, et cetera. So I think we're working with an unrealistic framework here. And to me, again, since we've put in the market, responsive need here to get as much money as possible, we ought to be able to quantify that in a little bit. And let's make a rational decision about to what extent all of these extra guidelines and extra negotiations and longer term, stretching out the process to do all sorts of reviews and flexibility and all of that is going to cost us. And then we'll make our decision. To me, I think that kind of an economic analysis or a market feasibility analysis is an important part of that. Second issue I have, or second question I have, if we're going to require buffers and trees in between the site, et cetera, as sort of a mandatory piece of this, what about the alternative of subdividing the parcel? and putting out to bid in a simple, a simple disposition of city-owned property of a smaller slice of the thing, and let the city keep the part that's gonna be open space as a park or whatever. That's another one. Okay, let me see. That's enough for now.
Thank you, Bill. Ben, do you want to address those? Do you want me to?
I can respond. I do see Councilor Wilson's hand up. I don't know if Councilor Wilson, is that in response at all to Bill's questions?
Councilor Wilson?
Might just take a second to unmute.
Here he is.
Yep, exactly. Sorry. Yeah, you might have been about to say the same thing, but we can do different zoning districts in a parcel. So if it wouldn't necessarily require us to, break up and sell off parcels. If we decided we wanted to, say, require civic space, right? Let's just say hypothetically, abutting 84 Washington, we could do that. We have that power under zoning, and that might turn out to be a more elegant solution here. Just throwing that out there.
Thank you, Councilor. Ben, do you want to?
Sure. Why don't I respond to the first question about the economic analysis and kind of what we're expecting this to produce. So, I mean, I guess the first thing I'll respond to is just the comment about like whether this will produce something unique through all this process versus just kind of the same development that we would see otherwise through the market. I hear what you're saying, Bill, that like it often feels like the development that is produced from these kind of more city involved processes feels very similar. I do think we have, unique situations where given the city's level of involvement, like Powderhouse School, for instance, what that has been redeveloped into in Davis Teal, that, that site is a very unique mix of different uses and historic reuse, partially because the city was so involved throughout that process and like really able to have that back and forth with the development team. But I understand your point. We have had, conversations with our real estate advisor about like what is economically viable here. And I think it's partially, we do still believe that this is viable to expect other benefits with high density development. But partially we would need to see what comes in as responses to that RFP process to have something to respond to. But these are very much conversations we have with our real estate advisor, and we do still feel that it's feasible. In terms of subdividing the parcel, this is a possibility that we could subdivide, or as Councilor Wilson mentioned, and I'll acknowledge he just had to drop off. There's also the possibility, so zoning districts don't actually need to match up with parcel boundaries. They usually do. They do not need to. Technically, you could have multiple zones within the parcel. I think there are other ways of ensuring that buffer without the need to do different zoning across the parcel. And partially this allows flexibility in what responses are coming in and how they see the best way to kind of create that buffer rather than creating the exact lines ourselves now. So I think that is why that hasn't been our approach to that, but definitely heard, and I know that that's something that has been floated in other conversations. Rachel, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think Powderhouse School is a great example. The other one I do want to point out, because we're much more active in it at the moment, is 299 Broadway. The SRA is also a part of the conversation there in a different format, but they are because it's also an urban renewal district. And again, there's just I think what we might be able to deliver once we actually have a partner that we're working with is those in-depth conversations in a way that we are not just the regulator, we are also we have a different decision-making authority in a project like this than we do in a typical development process. Will the outcomes be fundamentally different? Not, ultimately the market can produce what the market can produce. So we will still have that reality as well. But I do think we are in a different position relative to that negotiation because of our involvement in selecting a property owner, the ultimate property owner at the end of the day.
And just for context, when the development project plan was originally drafted, with the public safety building in mind for this site, the ultimate process for determining the complementary development around the public safety building was modeled after the process for the Powder House School, and how that was developed through successive requests for proposals. So there is background there with that process. All right, moving forward. Zach, your thoughts and or questions about these updated goals?
Yeah, honestly, I was pretty happy with, I think, the summary of just kind of like what we're looking for from the developers at this point. I think it captures pretty well a lot of the comments that we've made on previous meetings. I will say I do also think that the like subdivision question is like interesting and potentially useful, but it sounds like we have a lot of different ways of achieving that. So I personally don't have any strong opinions on which is best. But yeah, I would just say I think what we're looking for from developers seems to capture pretty well what we've said. So I was pretty pleased with that. Don't really have any specific questions that haven't already been asked.
All right, thank you. And Rory, your thoughts and or questions?
No, can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Yeah. Just first off, you know, I share Paolo's frustration with the whole process, having to live near enough to the site. I never 100% thought it was the ideal place for the public safety building in the first place. I'm not sure about the idea of a police station with affordable housing above it ever really kind of hit me in the right way. So maybe there is an opportunity here to do something different and something pretty cool, maybe. But one thing that struck out to me about the three proposals, I think it was Onyx had maybe proposed a pedestrian link over the commuter rail tracks to the T station. And I don't know, maybe if the city can work with the T to use that as an incentive, because that would unlock a huge amount of value and potential in that site. So maybe something in those points along the lines of access to the T station or public transport. I know that there was also talk of a bike path that would go by Sullivan and over to Assembly, and with the new bridge going over the Mystic, that whole area becomes a huge hub, a public transit and alternative transit connection kind of hub. So I think just like when we're going for RFP or whatever it is, that you know, we really push the idea of a developer and the city working to connect it properly to the T station. And also I like the idea of going mid or high rise, because I think this is a perfect spot to get housing, affordable housing, and access to public transit.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Thank you to the committee for providing your questions and input. Ben, do you want to conclude your presentation?
Yeah, I think so. That's generally what I wanted to walk through. Just because we have a few members of the public, also just want to give an opportunity if anybody does want to comment.
Yes. Yes, we're now moving on to the public comment portion of the agenda. And as Ben, we do have some members of the public here. So feel free to raise your hand and I will allow you to ask your question. Any questions?
Anne Ryan has her hand up.
All right, Anne.
There, I unmuted myself. Do you need to move forward on shutting off the current parking base between 86 and 60 Washington, 74, excuse me, between 74 and 84 Washington by December? Is that still something that you're planning to do? Because from what I came late, so I apologize. Okay. I just want to understand, as I understand it, you're going for new RFPs. Do you need to do that work as rapidly as you were originally planning?
Sure. So the short answer is no. We are working closely. So myself and also legal counsel with the city are working closely with Corcoran Jennison, Cobble Hill Apartments on kind of what the way to address adding parking onto the larger Cobble Hill site should be. So part of that conversation is also kind of the ongoing use of that parking area. So I'll say we're in conversations and, we're making progress in those conversations about how to move that. We don't want to end up in a situation where, people are losing access to parking before there's a replacement for it. So we're really trying to be collaborative on that.
Okay.
Any further questions?
It looked like Anne might. Did you have any follow-up question to that, Anne?
Well, I have it's a slightly different question. But have you considered consulting with, let's say, something like the Gates Foundation because the market question is very real, and resolving the financial problem is real. I just wonder if you've considered the environmental value of what exists now and not upending it as enough of an argument worthy of a foundation paying attention to your financial problem. And that those trade-offs are important enough for them to consider. And that you would approach the Rockefeller Foundation, the Gates Foundation, etc., and put this dilemma before them, if you would consider doing that.
I just want to make sure I understand. So you mean bringing it to a foundation with the hopes of having them kind of avoid having them incentivize not redeveloping and instead preserving the trees and green space on the site?
Yes.
Okay, making the city whole. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not aware of the role of foundations in that kind of project. That would be a very unique use of grant funding.
Yeah.
I do hear what you're saying, that there is this is an ecological resource as well as a financial one, and I hear that. And our process, especially our development review process and our permitting process really does seek to respect that. There are strong ecological advocates within the city
Yes.
and among city staff. And so it's definitely a perspective that we think a lot about, and we want to make sure that what is proposed here takes that into account and creates green space and preserves what is possible, but then also creates green space that is ecologically healthy.
I'm very interested in resolving the financial problem as well. And so some thinking that recognizes how serious this is for the city. And I'm not saying write a grant. I'm saying go ask them if they would consider the city's dilemma. And do it right now, because there are people at those foundations who recognize these trade-offs and the money involved, because it's serious for you guys. I get that. But I'm just wondering if there isn't some, I suspect that there are people thinking about financial trade-offs differently than making all of us have to deal with a developer who will be very hard to cope with down the line. That's my super dread. I don't know if I'm making sense, but this is more of a series of questions. Okay, good.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I haven't thought of that kind of funding source. Let me just even think more about that idea. But I definitely hear the underlying concern and the desire not to pit financial versus environmental health.
Yep.
And I hear that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. We have two other members of the public in attendance. Melaine and Kim, do either of you have questions or comments?
Hi, this is Melaine. I'm on the phone, so I can't raise my hand, so I apologize if I cut ahead of Kim. and I do have to jump soon. I do want to say I think the memo was written really well. I think someone mentioned some great comments about that kind of working with MBTA and creating an overpass. I think that would be great in terms of unlocking value to the space. I'd like to acknowledge my good friend Anne. I'm glad she's here raising that point. I will say though that the memo that covers more housing, civic space for those of us that do a lot of community organizing like myself and others, and the green space would definitely, I'm glad it's mentioned, and I think it'd be helpful in trying to get buy-in on moving forward with the development. I think as city planners, you guys considered all of the elements out there in terms of what the situation has now ended up being, in that there's not going to be a public safety building there. So I'm happy to see everybody trying to create some value out of the situation that we're now in. So thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no other hands raised at this point, I am going to move forward. Councillor Wilson does say that he had to run into a Ward 6 community meeting, but he will catch up on the rest of this at a later time. So the next part of the agenda is other business not anticipated. Oh, sorry, Ben, go ahead.
I just want to make a quick comment on zoning. So I know I had referenced this in the memo. The conversation is still like a little more ongoing than I was hoping it would be by the time we met tonight. So I can follow up with more detail either over email or in kind of the next conversation, in the next CSE conversation that we have with more zoning detail. And I've already heard kind of helpful feedback this evening about, you know, what types of density people are comfortable with. Also kind of this interest in potentially like if addressing concerns about the buffer are best done through splitting the site or kind of having split zoning. I've also heard an openness to kind of having other ways of addressing that. So those have all been super helpful feedback. We're still in kind of the conversations about rezoning up front versus after. I think we're hearing, you know, there are strong advocates for both approaches. I know that the conversations here have primarily focused on clarity up front and rezoning ahead of time to kind of give that clarity. So that's mostly just to summarize, you know, those are comments that I have heard in past meetings. In this meeting, I'm hoping to give more detail about the strategy. I just don't have it easily summarized right now. So I will plan to do that either at our next meeting or an email subsequent to this meeting. Rachel, is there any other comment you want to add to that?
Yeah, I know. We're having a program at 7 o'clock. Sorry. So we'll have to... sorry, I'm at the library and they have a meeting coming in about 20 minutes. Wanted to just reflect on where we are in sort of those pathways. Bill, you've mentioned a lot, and I know others have mentioned too, wanting there to be that clarity up front around zoning first. We are trying to figure that out still. The idea that we had put in the memo is rezoning to high rise, given that MR6 does cap out at 6 stories, and there has been a lot of conversation in this group about going above that. We've been trying to strike this balance of, you know, what do we have on our books today versus creating that pathway to building types that don't exist currently. And so that's where we've been. And this is very much an active conversation. We will definitely spend more time talking about zoning via email and in probably the next conversation as well.
Great. And I noticed that Paolo has his hand up. Paolo, do you have a question?
I do, but just to sort of react to that, just to the high-rise zoning, just because I've been on previous meetings where I've been an advocate against that. Last thing I want to see is more 20-story towers in this building, in this town. But I feel like I have to retract that because that would obviously be an impediment. There's no chance we're going to get a developer in here who's going to be limited to 7 stories and taking this on at the price it is. So I kind of accept that loss at this point. You may have been, my original point of what I wanted to ask, and Ted, you may be getting into it anyway, is in the memo, it mentioned sort of the ideal time frame of when to present this to the city council at their next meeting, et cetera. Just based on what we have said, to sort of get yours and Ben and Rachel's take, are we still on that time frame? Would it still be sort of presented to the city council at its next meeting later this month, or sort of what is our next steps from here in terms of presentation, our next attempt to response when we hit the next stage of RFQs, et cetera?
In general, we're trying to hew to that schedule that we announced in the memo, but I'm going to let Ben and Rachel provide more detail on that.
So yeah, so the intention is still to meet the timeline that we laid out. So there's an SRA meeting next week where we are going to take these updated goals and feedback from the CAC and summarize that for them in another memo, and then those accompanying goals. And then our goal is still to present this to the City Council, ideally at their October 23rd meeting. We always kind of have to be responsive to like what makes sense in the moment. So sometimes it gets bumped a meeting. So it's tough to sometimes commit to that until like a few days before, truly. But our goal is to do that as soon as possible. We want their buy-in on these goals also. And then we also want to make sure that we're updating the relevant documents. So the demonstration project plan, and the agreement between the council and the SRA that I mentioned, that we're updating those documents to kind of reflect this new direction and these goals for the project. So that also will require a public hearing. So those are all meetings that, like, as they're coming up, we will let you know as they're happening. But the next ones to look out for are still the SRA meeting next week, in which there will be some executive session discussion and then some public discussion, and then also the presentation to the City Council, which our goal is still October 23rd. If that gets pushed back a meeting, we will communicate that to CSE members.
Thank you. Especially the 23rd. If that happens, I'd love to be there.
Excellent. All right.
Rachel is coming.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one last layer. Our hope also is, again, we're going to send you that date once it's firmed up. Please invite your friends and neighbors to that conversation with the City Council. That's an opportunity, not just from, we're going to send them a memo, like a summary of everything that's been discussed here. But also feel free to come, add your voice, and encourage your friends and neighbors to come too and add their voices as well. They're going to be looking for all kinds of feedback to make sure that we are, they're getting the full breadth of the community's perspectives on these questions.
Your hand
Paolo is
went back
clapping.
up. Oh, is that oh, okay, got it. I can never tell what the emoji is.
All right. Any other comments or questions? All right. Seeing none, we're going to, I'm going to ask each member of the committee if it's acceptable to conclude this meeting. So starting with Paolo. Paolo, is it all right if we end the meeting here?
All set from me.
Thank you. Bill Mahaney.
Yes.
Rory.
Yep.
Alex.
Yep, good with me.
Zach.
Yep.
Bill Valletta.
He did a thumbs up.
Okay, excellent. Thank you all very much. Thank you for attending tonight and for an excellent meeting. And we will notify you when the committee will meet next. Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you all. Have a good one.
Thanks,
Super
Ted.
helpful feedback. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.